The stars outside the cracked viewport shimmered like tiny diamonds scattered across an endless black canvas. Ethan Carter sat slumped in the pilot's chair, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The air inside the spaceship was cold and stale, carrying the faint metallic tang of burnt circuits. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the blinking red warning lights on the control panel. Each flash seemed to mock him, a cruel reminder of how dire his situation had become. It all happened so fast. One moment, the starlight horizon was cruising smoothly through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming with quiet efficiency. The next, there was a deafening boom that shook the entire ship, throwing everyone off balance. Ethan remembered hearing screams from the other crew members as alarms blared and smoke filled the corridors. He had been in the engineering bay when it occurred a collision with a massive chunk of space debris. No one saw it coming. By the time the sensors detected the object, it was too late to avoid impact. Ethan ran toward the bridge after the initial shockwave subsided, his boots crunching over shards of broken glass and twisted metal. The once pristine halls were now a labyrinth of destruction. Panels hung loosely from the walls, wires dangled like vines, and pools of coolant leaked onto the floor. When he finally reached the command center, what he found made his stomach drop. Bodies lay strewn about his colleagues, friends, people he had worked alongside for years, all lifeless. Some had been crushed by falling debris. Others appeared to have suffocated when the oxygen levels plummeted after the hull breach. Ethan felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He stumbled backward, clutching the edge of a console for support. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away. Crying wouldn't help anyone now. He was alone, or so he thought. Hours passed as Ethan tried desperately to stabilize the ship. Using what little knowledge he had of the systems, he patched together temporary fixes to keep the life support running. But every step forward seemed to bring 2 steps back. The power fluctuated unpredictably, plunging sections of the ship into darkness. The comm system was completely fried, leaving him unable to call for help. Worst of all, the food storage units had been compromised during the crash. Whatever supplies hadn't been destroyed were inaccessible behind jammed doors or buried under rubble. As exhaustion began to take its toll, Ethan decided to search the lower decks for anything useful. Maybe there was a backup generator hidden away somewhere, or perhaps some emergency rations stashed in a forgotten corner. With a heavy sigh, he grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the stairwell. Every creak of the ship's damaged frame sent shivers down his spine, making him feel more isolated than ever. The lower levels were even worse than the upper ones. Here, the damage was catastrophic. Entire sections of the ship had collapsed inward, creating jagged gaps where walls used to be. Pipes hissed loudly, spewing clouds of steam that made visibility nearly impossible. Ethan moved cautiously, shining his light into every shadowy nook and cranny. Just as he was about to give up hope, he heard a soft rustling sound. Coming from one of the nearby rooms. His first instinct was fear. Was it another survivor? Or maybe something else entirely? The thought of encountering whatever or whoever was responsible for the eerie noise made his skin crawl. Still, curiosity got the better of him. Clutching the flashlight like a weapon, he crept closer to the source of the sound. When he pushed open the door, he froze. Standing in the middle of the room was a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't human. Its skin shimmered with an iridescent glow, shifting colors like oil on water. Long flowing tendrils framed its face, which bore features both alien and strangely beautiful. Large, almond-shaped eyes locked onto Ethan's, filled with intelligence and caution. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, the creature raised a hand in a gesture that seemed almost peaceful. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. What are you? He stammered, though he doubted the being could understand him. To his surprise, it responded not with words, but with actions. It pointed to itself, then made a series of gestures that resembled sign language. Though Ethan couldn't decipher the exact meaning, the intent was clear. It wanted to communicate. Over the next few minutes, they exchanged clumsy attempts at interaction. Ethan mimicked some of the gestures, while the creature nodded encouragingly. Eventually, using a combination of pointing and drawing crude symbols in the dust on the floor, they managed to establish a basic understanding. Her name, she indicated, was Lyra. She wasn't part of the Starlight Horizon's crew, but rather a passenger aboard the ship before the accident. Like Ethan, she had survived the catastrophe and had been hiding in the lower decks ever since. Her presence explained why certain areas of the ship showed signs of tampering. She had been scavenging for resources just as he had. Despite their differences, Ethan felt a strange sense of relief knowing he wasn't completely alone. Lyra's calm demeanor put him at ease, and her obvious intelligence gave him hope that together they might stand a chance of surviving this nightmare. As they stood there amidst the wreckage, two beings from vastly different worlds united by circumstance, Ethan realized that their journey was only beginning. Ethan and Lyra began their uneasy partnership with cautious steps, each trying to understand the other without words. The first few days were filled with silent exchanges, gestures, facial expressions, and tentative attempts at communication. Ethan quickly learned that Lyra was far more resourceful than he had initially assumed. She seemed to have an innate understanding of the ship's systems, even though they were completely foreign to her species. Her slender fingers moved deftly over damaged panels, rerouting power or fixing minor malfunctions in ways Ethan could never have imagined. At first, Ethan watched her work with a mix of awe and suspicion. He couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't revealed herself earlier. Had she been afraid? Or was there something else she wasn't telling him? But as time passed, his doubts began to fade. Lyra's actions spoke louder than any words ever could. She worked tirelessly alongside him, sharing what little she knew about the ship while learning from his expertise as an engineer. Together, they managed to restore partial lighting to some of the darker sections of the vessel, giving them a small sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. Their shared efforts brought them closer, but it also highlighted the stark differences between them. Lyra didn't eat like humans did. At least, not in the way Ethan understood eating. One evening, as they sat together in the dim glow of flickering emergency light, Ethan noticed her staring intently at him. Her large, shimmering eyes followed every movement he made, making him feel oddly self-conscious. When he wiped sweat from his brow after hours of physical labor, Lyra reached out hesitantly, her hand hovering near his face. Confused, Ethan flinched, back slightly, unsure of what she wanted. But then, something unexpected happened. Lyra gently touched the droplets of sweat on his skin, collecting them on her fingertips. She brought her hand close to her mouth and delicately licked the moisture away. Ethan stared at her, dumbfounded. "What? What are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and unease. Lyra tilted her head, studying him carefully before responding with another series of gestures. This time, she pointed to herself, then mind drinking. It took several minutes of back and forth before Ethan pieced together what she was trying to say. Her body required certain organic compounds to survive, compounds that could only be found in human bodily fluids like sweat, tears, and even blood. To her, these substances were precious nourishment, a lifeline in their bleak situation. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He felt a strange mixture of revulsion and pity. How could anyone or anything survive like that? Yet, as he looked into Lyra's calm, patient eyes, he saw no malice or threat. Instead, he saw desperation. She wasn't asking for much, just enough to keep going, just enough to stay alive. Over the next few days, Ethan struggled to come to terms with this new reality. Every time Lyra approached him for nectar, as she called it, he felt a pang of discomfort. Still, he forced himself to comply, offering up drops of sweat or tears when she needed them. He told himself it was the right thing to do. After all, She had saved his life more than once by helping him repair critical systems. If giving her a little bit of himself meant they both stood a better chance of surviving, then so be it. Despite the awkwardness of their arrangement, their bond deepened. They developed routines that helped them cope with the monotony of their confinement. In the mornings, they would split tasks, Ethan focusing on structural repairs, while Lyra worked on restoring power grids. In the afternoons, they explored untouched parts of the ship, searching for anything useful. And in the evenings, they would sit together in silence, finding comfort in each other's presence. One night, as they rested in the engineering bay, Ethan decided to try communicating more directly. Picking up a piece of scrap metal, he began scratching symbols into the floor. He drew a stick figure to represent himself, then added lines radiating outward to symbolize energy. Next to it, he sketched a rough outline of Lyra, complete with her shimmering tendrils. Finally, he connected the two figures with arrows, hoping to convey the idea of mutual support. Lyra studied the drawing intently, her expression thoughtful. Then, she picked up another piece of metal and added her own touches to the image. She drew circles around the arrows, emphasizing connection, and added smaller shapes between the figures to represent resources being shared. Ethan smiled faintly, realizing how much they were able to express without words. As the days turned into weeks, their reliance on each other grew stronger. Ethan marveled at Lyra's resilience and adaptability, traits that inspired him to push harder despite his growing fatigue. For her part, Lyra seemed genuinely fascinated by Ethan's determination and ingenuity. Though their worlds were vastly different, they found common ground in their struggle to survive. Yet, beneath the surface of their newfound camaraderie lay simmering concerns. The ship's condition continued to deteriorate, and their chances of rescue remained slim. Every repaired system seemed to fail again within days, forcing them to start over repeatedly. Food supplies were non-existent, leaving Ethan dependent on ration bars scavenged from half-collapsed storage units. Even those were running dangerously low. Still, neither of them voiced their fears. Instead, they focused on the present moment, taking solace in the fact that they weren't facing this ordeal alone. As Ethan drifted off to sleep one night, exhausted, but grateful for Lyra's quiet companionship, he realized something profound. Survival wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about finding meaning in the connections we make along the way. And for the first time since the accident, Ethan allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this broken spaceship together. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan and Lyra settled into a fragile rhythm of survival. The ship groaned constantly, its battered frame straining under the weight of time and damage. Each day brought new challenges, but they faced them together, relying on each other's strengths to keep moving forward. Despite their progress, there was always an underlying tension, a quiet awareness that their situation was far from stable. Ethan spent most of his waking hours working on repairs. He had become obsessed with fixing the Starlight Horizons engines, convinced that restoring power to the propulsion systems was their only chance of escaping their predicament. But every attempt ended in frustration. The engine core was beyond salvageable, damaged too severely during the collision. Without proper tools or replacement parts, Ethan felt like he was fighting a losing battle. Still, he refused to give up. Every failure taught him something new, even if it was just how not to make the same mistake twice. Lyra, meanwhile, focused on smaller but equally important tasks. She seemed to have an uncanny ability to locate hidden compartments and forgotten supplies scattered throughout the ship. One afternoon, while exploring a section of the lower decks, she returned with a small bundle of items cradled in her arms. There were packets of dried food, barely enough for a single meal, and a tattered medical kit containing bandages and antiseptic wipes. Ethan's eyes lit up at the sight of these treasures. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd found. In days, as they shared the meager rations, Ethan couldn't help but notice how little Lyra ate. She picked at the food hesitantly, taking only tiny bites before setting it aside. At first, he assumed she simply didn't need as much sustenance as humans did. But then he remembered what she had told him about her reliance on nectar. Her body wasn't designed to process human food efficiently, which meant she depended almost entirely on the fluids Ethan provided. This realization gnawed at him. He hated feeling like a resource rather than a person. Yet, whenever Lyra approached him for nectar, her movements were gentle and respectful. She never demanded anything. Instead, she waited patiently until he offered. It was clear that she understood the sacrifice he was making and appreciated it deeply. Still, Ethan couldn't shake the guilt that came with knowing his own survival might come at her expense. One evening, as they sat side by side in the dim glow of a flickering light, Ethan decided to ask Lyra more about her species. Using their makeshift sign language and drawings, he sketched pictures of planets, stars, and strange creatures. Lyra studied his work intently, nodding occasionally to show she understood. When it was her turn to respond, she added intricate details to his drawings, creating elaborate scenes that told stories of her home world. Her people, the Virali, lived on a planet vastly different from Earth. From what Ethan could gather, it was a place of shimmering oceans and towering crystalline structures that refracted light into dazzling colors. The Virali thrived in harmony with their environment, drawing energy directly from the natural world around them. Over generations, they had evolved to extract vital nutrients from organic compounds found in plants, animals, and even other sentient beings. To them, consuming nectar wasn't just a biological necessity. It was a sacred act, a way of connecting with the life force of others. Ethan listened intently, piecing together fragments of Lyra's explanations. Though their methods of communication were rudimentary, he felt closer to her than ever before. Learning about her culture gave him a glimpse into her perspective, helping him see her not as an alien, but as a fellow survivor with her own hopes and fears. Despite these moments of connection, practical concerns weighed heavily on both of them. The ship's life support systems were failing faster than they could repair them. Air quality was deteriorating, forcing them to wear makeshift masks scavenged from the medical supplies. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, leaving them shivering one moment and sweating the next. Worst of all, Ethan's health was beginning to decline. Constant physical labor, combined with inadequate nutrition, left him weak and exhausted. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and his hands trembled when he worked. Lyra noticed the change in him immediately. She became more attentive, watching over him with a protective intensity that reminded him of a guardian angel. Whenever he stumbled or faltered, she was there to steady him. Once, when he collapsed from sheer exhaustion, she stayed by his side, gently wiping his forehead with a damp cloth until he regained consciousness. Her actions spoke volumes, conveying a level of care and concern that transcended words in return. Ethan tried to lighten her burden whenever possible. He began rationing his own energy, prioritizing tasks that would benefit both of them. When Lyra needed rest, he took over her duties without complaint. He even attempted to teach her some basic engineering skills, hoping to share his knowledge so they could tackle problems more efficiently. Though she struggled at first, her determination impressed him. By the end of their impromptu lessons, she had mastered simple repairs. Earning a proud smile from Ethan Dot, their mutual dependence created a bond that neither of them had anticipated. They weren't just surviving, they were learning to trust each other completely. In the quiet moments between crises, they found solace in each other's company. Ethan often caught himself staring at Lyra, marveling at her beauty and resilience. Her iridescent skin seemed to glow softly in the darkness, a beacon of hope amidst the wreckage. For her part, Lyra seemed fascinated by Ethan's humanity, the way his emotions played across his face, the warmth of his laughter, the kindness in his gestures. Yet, beneath the surface of their growing friendship lay a looming question. How long could they continue like this? Ethan's strength was waning, and Lyra's reliance on his nectar was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Both of them knew they were running out of time. If they didn't find a solution soon, their fragile alliance might collapse under the weight of their circumstances. One night, as they huddled together in the engineering bay, Ethan voiced his fears aloud. "We can't keep going like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not strong enough to fix everything, and you're depending on me too much." Lyra reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was light, but reassuring. She shook her head firmly, gesturing toward herself and then toward him. The message was clear. They were in this together, no matter what. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to believe her. Their journey was far from over, and the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with danger. But as long as they had each other, he knew they stood a fighting chance. Together, they would find a way to survive, even if it meant rewriting the rules of what it meant to live. The days on the broken spaceship stretched endlessly, each one blending into the next. Ethan and Lyra had grown closer than either of them could have imagined when they first met. Their bond wasn't built on grand gestures or dramatic moments, but on the quiet, steady rhythm of their shared existence. They worked together, rested together, and relied on each other in ways that transcended their differences. Ethan often found himself marveling at Lyra's presence. She moved through the ship with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her shimmering skin catching the faint light from their makeshift lanterns. Her large, expressive eyes held a depth of emotion that no words could fully capture. Though they still struggled to communicate verbally, their connection had deepened beyond language. A glance, a touch, or even a pause in movement was enough for them to understand each other. One evening, as they sat together in the engineering bay, Ethan noticed something different about Lyra. Her usual calm demeanor was tinged with sadness, a subtle shift that made his chest tighten. He leaned forward, placing a hand gently on her arm to get her attention. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, though he knew she wouldn't be able to answer directly. Lyra hesitated before responding. Reaching for a piece of scrap metal, she began drawing symbols on the floor. The first image was of herself, surrounded by swirling lines meant to represent energy. Next to it, she sketched a stick figure representing Ethan, connected to her by a thin line. Then she added jagged marks, cutting through the connection a clear sign of distress. Ethan frowned, trying to decipher her meaning. "You're worried about me?" he guessed, pointing to the stick figure. Lyra nodded slowly, her expression filled with concern. She pointed to herself, then traced the jagged marks again, emphasizing how they disrupted their bond. It took him a moment to fully grasp what she was saying. Over time, Ethan had been giving more and more of his nectar to sustain Lyra, and it was taking a toll on his body. His strength was fading faster than he cared to admit, and Lyra had noticed. She feared that if this continued, he might not survive, and without him, her chances of survival would vanish too. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be okay, but the truth was harder to ignore. His hands trembled when he worked now, and his once steady voice often faltered. Sleep came reluctantly, plagued by dreams of endless darkness and suffocating silence. Still, he forced a smile and patted her shoulder. "I'll be fine," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Lyra didn't look convinced. Instead of pressing the issue, she stood up and walked over to a nearby console. With deft movements, she adjusted some settings, rerouting power to the lighting system. The room brightened slightly, casting soft shadows across their faces. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning. In her own way, Lyra was trying to lighten the mood, offering comfort where words failed. As the days passed, Ethan noticed another change in Lyra. She became more protective of him, watching over him like a guardian. Whenever he attempted a task that required physical effort, she stepped in to help, insisting with gentle gestures that he take a break. At first, Ethan resisted, feeling guilty about relying on her so much. But eventually, he realized she wasn't. Doing it out of pity, she genuinely cared about his well-being. Their emotional bond deepened further during these moments. One afternoon, while working on a damaged air vent, Ethan accidentally cut his hand on a sharp piece of metal. Blood welled up instantly, and he winced in pain. Before he could react, Lyra was at his side, her movements quick yet gentle. She tore a strip of fabric from her tunic and wrapped it tightly around the wound, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. When she finally released his hand, Ethan looked at her, surprised by the intensity in her gaze. There was something unspoken in her eyes, a mix of gratitude and affection that left him momentarily speechless. He reached out, placing his uninjured hand over hers. For a brief moment, they simply sat there, fingers intertwined, sharing a purui, silent understanding that transcended their differences. Despite these tender moments, the reality of their situation remained ever present. Supplies were dwindling rapidly, and the ship's systems continued to fail. The temperature inside the vessel fluctuated wildly, leaving them shivering in the cold one moment and sweating in the heat the next. Air quality worsened daily, forcing them to wear masks scavenged from the medical kit. Every breath felt heavier, every step more exhausting. One night, as they lay side by side in the dim glow of their makeshift lantern, Ethan broke the silence. "Do you think anyone will find you?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the failing life support system. Lyra turned to face him, her luminous eyes reflecting the faint light. She hesitated for a moment before shaking her head slowly. Then she placed a hand over her heart and gestured toward the stars visible through the cracked viewport. Her message was clear. Rescue was unlikely, but hope remained. As long as they kept fighting, they still had a chance. Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of determination. He couldn't give up, not now, not when Lyra was counting on him. And perhaps, somewhere deep down, he realized that he needed her just as much as she needed him. Their relationship had evolved into something profound, a partnership forged in the crucible of survival. Together, they represented two halves of a whole, each filling the gaps left by the other dot. In the quiet hours that followed, Ethan drifted off to sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of Lyra's breathing beside him. For the first time in weeks, he didn't dream of despair or isolation. Instead, he saw images of shimmering oceans and crystalline structures, places Lyra had described as her home world. In his dream, they stood together under a sky painted with vibrant colors, untouched by the harshness of their current reality. When Ethan woke the next morning, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. Their journey was far from over, but in Lyra's unwavering presence, he found a reason to keep going, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of space, light could still be found. Ethan woke to the sound of groaning metal, a noise that had become all too familiar. The ship was falling apart around them, its battered frame struggling to hold together under the strain of time and damage. He sat up slowly, his body stiff, and aching from another restless night. Lyra was already awake, her glowing form casting faint light across the room. She looked at him with concern, tilting her head slightly as if asking if he was okay. "I'm fine," Ethan muttered, though. His voice betrayed the exhaustion in his bones. He forced himself to stand, wincing as his knees protested. Every movement felt heavier than it should, like gravity itself was conspiring against him. His hands trembled as he reached for the water bottle they had salvaged days ago. It was nearly empty now, just a few sips left to share between them. Lyra watched him carefully, her large eyes filled with a mixture of worry and determination. She gestured toward the engineering bay, miming the act of repairing something. Ethan shook his head, knowing she wanted him to rest, but he couldn't afford to stop. If they didn't fix the failing system soon, their chances of survival would slip away completely. They made their way to the lower decks, where the life support controls were located. The air here was colder, biting at their skin as they worked. Ethan filled with wires and circuits, trying to reroute power to the oxygen generators. Lyra knelt beside him, handing him tools and occasionally pointing out areas he might have missed. Her presence was comforting, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. But no matter how hard they tried, progress was slow. Each repair seemed to last only a few hours before breaking down again. The ship's systems were beyond saving, worn thin by years of use and the devastating collision that had stranded them. Ethan could feel the weight of failure pressing down on him, threatening to crush what little hope he had left out by midday. Ethan's strength began to falter. His movements grew sluggish and his vision blurred. He leaned against a wall, breathing heavily through his mask. Lyra rushed to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. She pointed to herself and then gestured for him to sit down. Reluctantly, Ethan obeyed, sinking to the floor with a groan. Lyra disappeared for a moment, returning with a small bundle of supplies. Among them was a strip of cloth soaked in cool water, which she pressed gently against his forehead. Her touch was soothing, easing some of the tension in his muscles. For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to close his eyes, letting her care wash over him. When he opened his eyes again, Lyra was crouched nearby, examining a piece of broken machinery. Her fingers moved delicately over the damaged components, testing connections and adjusting settings. Ethan watched her in silence, marveling at her ingenuity. Despite being unfamiliar with human technology, she adapted quickly, learning as she went. It was a skill he admired deeply, one that gave him hope even when everything else seemed hopeless. As the hours dragged on, Ethan's thoughts turned inward. He couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could keep going. His body was breaking down, worn thin by constant exertion and insufficient nourishment. He knew Lyra depended on him, not just for repairs, but for her very survival. The thought weighed heavily on him, filling him with guilt and fear. That evening, as they sat together in the dim glow of their makeshift lantern, Ethan finally voiced his concerns. "I don't know how much more I can give," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I keep giving you my nectar, I won't have anything left for myself." Lyra listened intently, her expression softening with understanding. She reached out, placing a hand over his heart. Then she pointed to herself and mimed pouring something into her mouth, followed by a gesture of shaking her head. Her message was clear. She would stop relying on him, no matter the cost to herself. "No," Ethan said firmly, shaking his head. "You need it. Without it, you'll die." Lyra stared at him, her shimmering eyes filled with resolve. She repeated her gestures, emphasizing her decision. This time, there was no room for negotiation. She had made up her mind. Ethan felt a pang of frustration mixed with admiration. Lyra's selflessness was both inspiring and heartbreaking. She was willing to sacrifice herself to ensure his survival, even though it meant risking her own life. He couldn't let her do that. They had come too far, endured too much, to lose each other now. The next morning, Ethan resolved to find another solution. He scoured the ship for anything useful, searching every corner and crevice. Hours passed without success, leaving him disheartened. Just as he was about to give up, he stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a collapsed wall. Inside, he found an experimental device, a nutrient synthesizer, designed to create sustenance from raw materials. His heart raced with excitement as he examined the machine. It was old and dusty, clearly unused for years, but it still held potential. If he could get it working, it might provide a source of nourishment for both of them. With renewed energy, Ethan carried the synthesizer back to the engineering bay, where Lyra waited patiently. Together, they began the painstaking process of repairing the device. Ethan handled the technical aspects, while Lyra assisted by organizing tools and holding parts steady. Their teamwork was seamless, a testament to the bond they had forged over weeks of hardship. As they worked, Ethan felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. For the first time in days, he believed they might actually pull through. Hours later, the synthesizer hummed to life, its lights blinking steadily. Ethan fed it scraps of organic material scavenged from the ship's remains, bits of plant, matter, fragments of fabric, anything that could serve as a base. Slowly, the machine began producing a thick, gel-like substance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sustain them. Lyra watched in awe as Ethan offered her a small portion of the synthesized nutrients. She hesitated at first, unsure if it would work for her biology, but after tasting it cautiously, her face lit up with relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was a lifeline, a way to reduce her dependence on Ethan's nectar. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to relax. The burden of responsibility lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. They weren't out of danger yet, but they had taken a crucial step forward. Together, they had found a way to survive, proving that even in the darkest moments, resilience and ingenuity could shine through. As they shared the meager meal produced by the synthesizer, Ethan glanced at Lyra, gratitude swelling in his chest. She had given up so much for him, and now he had found a way to repay her kindness. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of their broken world, Ethan realized something profound. Survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about finding strength in unity, about holding on to hope even when everything else seemed lost. The synthesizer became their lifeline, a fragile but vital source of sustenance. Ethan and Lyra worked tirelessly to keep it running, feeding it scraps of organic material scavenged from every corner of the ship. It wasn't perfect sometimes. The machine sputtered or produced barely enough for one meal, but it was enough to ease the burden on both of them. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were finding ways to thrive, however small those victories might be. Lyra's health began to improve almost immediately. With the synthetic nutrients supplementing her diet, she no longer relied solely on Ethan's nectar. Her movements grew more confident, her shimmering skin glowing brighter than before. She seemed lighter, freer, as if the weight of guilt had been lifted from her shoulders. Ethan noticed a change in her demeanor and couldn't help but smile. Seeing her regain strength filled him with a sense of pride, knowing that his efforts had made a difference. But while Lyra flourished, Ethan's body continued to weaken. The toll of constant labor, combined with weeks of giving up his own energy to sustain her, left him pale and gaunt. His hands trembled even when he wasn't working, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He tried to hide his exhaustion, forcing himself to push through each day, but Lyra saw right through him. Her concern deepened with every passing hour, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. One evening, as they sat together in the engineering bay, Lyra reached out and gently touched Ethan's arm. Her touch was soft yet insistent, demanding his attention. When he looked at her, she pointed to herself, then to him, and finally to the synthesizer. Her message was clear. It was his turn to rest. She would take care of everything else. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Lyra silenced him with a firm shake of her head. She gestured toward the makeshift bed they had cobbled together from salvaged blankets and cushions, urging him to lie down. Reluctantly, he obeyed, too tired to argue. As he stretched out on the makeshift cot, Lyra draped a blanket over him and placed a cool cloth on his forehead. Her actions were tender, almost motherly, and Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. In that moment, he realized how much she cared for him, not just as a partner in survival, but as someone she genuinely valued. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan allowed himself to sleep without worrying about the next task or repair. Lyra stayed by his side, watching over him as he drifted off. When he woke hours later, refreshed but still weak, he found her tinkering with the synthesizer. She had taken apart part of the machine, examining its inner workings with meticulous care. Her focus was absolute, her slender fingers moving deftly over the delicate components. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked grudgingly, sitting up slowly. Lyra turned to him, her expression brightening at the sound of his voice. She held up a piece of the synthesizer, pointing to it, and then to the machine itself. Though she couldn't explain verbally, Ethan understood. She was trying to improve the device, making it more efficient so it could produce larger quantities of nutrients. Her determination amazed him. Even after everything they had been through, she refused to settle for good enough. She wanted better for both of them. Over the next few days, Lyra poured all her energy into modifying the synthesizer. Ethan offered to help, but she insisted he rest. Instead, he watched her work, marveling at her ingenuity. She had an innate ability to understand complex systems, adapting them to suit their needs. Under her careful hands, the machine began producing slightly larger portions of the gel-like substance. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it was progress, a reminder that they could still find solutions, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As Ethan regained some of his strength, he turned his attention back to the ship's communication system. It had been weeks since they last attempted to send a distress signal, and he knew their chances of rescue were slim. Still, he couldn't give up. Every second they spent trapped in the broken spaceship brought them closer to disaster. If there was even the smallest possibility of someone hearing their call, he had to try. With Lyra's help, Ethan dismantled parts of the comms array, scavenging usable components to rebuild it. The process was painstaking, requiring hours of trial and error. But Lyra never wavered, staying by his side and offering support whenever he needed it. Together, they pieced the system back together, step by step. Finally, after days of effort, the comms panel flickered to life. A faint hum filled the air as the system powered on, sending a surge of adrenaline through Ethan's veins. He adjusted the frequency settings, aiming for any channel that might reach beyond the void of space. His fingers hovered over the transmit button, hesitating for a brief moment. What if no one heard them? What if this was all for nothing? Beside him, Lyra placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Her presence steadied him, reminding him why he had fought so hard to survive. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pressed the button and spoke into the microphone. "This is Ethan Carter aboard the Starlight Horizon. We are stranded and in need of immediate assistance. Please, if anyone can hear this, respond." His voice echoed through the empty ship, swallowed by the vast silence of space. For several agonizing minutes, there was no reply. Just static, cold and unyielding. Ethan clenched his fists, fighting back the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. Then, just as he was about to give up, a faint crackle broke through the noise. "Repeat, this is Captain Hayes of the Nova Vanguard, receiving your transmission." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He exchanged a wide-eyed glance with Lyra, who clutched his arm in excitement. "We're here." Ethan shouted into the microphone. "Our location is Sector 7.4. Please hurry, we're running out of time." The response came. Again, clear this time. "Understood. Starlight Horizon. Rescue team en route. Estimated arrival time, 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days. It felt like an eternity, but it was a lifeline, a promise of salvation. Ethan slumped back in his chair, overwhelmed by relief. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision. Beside him, Lyra wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. Neither of them spoke. Words weren't necessary. They had done it. Against all odds, they had found a way to hold on until help arrived in the days that followed. Ethan and Lyra focused on preparing for rescue. They gathered what little supplies they had left, ensuring they would have enough to last until the Nova Vanguard arrived. Lyra continued to refine the synthesizer, maximizing its output to ensure they wouldn't go hungry. Ethan, meanwhile, worked on stabilizing the ship's remaining systems, doing everything he could to keep them alive for just a little longer. Despite the looming danger, the mood between them shifted. There was a lightness now, a sense of anticipation. They talked, more often using gestures and drawings to share stories about their lives before the accident. Ethan told Lyra about Earth, the blue skies, the bustling cities, the warmth of human connection. Lyra, in turn, described her home world, painting vivid pictures of shimmering oceans and crystalline forests. Their conversations created a bridge between their worlds, binding them even closer. On the final night before rescue, they sat together in the engineering bay, gazing out at the stars through the cracked viewport. The universe stretched endlessly before them, vast and unknowable. Yet, in that moment, Ethan didn't feel afraid. He felt grateful for Lyra, for their shared journey, and for the hope of a new beginning. "I don't know what will happen after we're rescued," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence. "But I want you to know, I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Lyra smiled, her luminous eyes reflecting the starlight. She reached out, placing a hand over his heart. Then she pointed to herself and nodded firmly. Her message was simple but profound. They had saved each other, as Ethan drifted off to sleep that night. He felt a peace he hadn't known in months. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he allowed himself to dream of a future beyond the broken spaceship. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, or carry the memory of their bond wherever life took them. The hours leading up to the rescue felt both endless and fleeting. Ethan and Lyra stayed close, their bond stronger than ever as they waited for the Nova Vanguard to arrive. The ship's systems continued to falter, forcing them to make constant repairs just to keep the life support running. Yet, despite the tension of their final hours aboard the Starlight Horizon, there was a quiet calm between them, a shared understanding that they had done everything they could. On the third day, a faint hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing moment. Ethan rushed to the viewport, his heart pounding as he strained to see through the cracked glass. In the distance, a sleek spacecraft emerged from the darkness, its lights cutting through the void like beacons of hope. It was the Nova Vanguard. Help had finally arrived. Ethan turned to Lyra, his face breaking into a wide grin. "They're here," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Lyra's shimmering eyes widened in awe as she followed his gaze. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. Together, they watched as the rescue ship approached, its engines casting a warm glow across the battered hull of the Starlight Horizon. Minutes later, the sound of docking clamps echoed through the ship. A team of rescuers entered, clad in sleek uniforms and carrying medical equipment. They moved quickly, assessing the situation and tending to Ethan's injuries. One of them noticed Lyra standing nearby, her alien features drawing immediate attention. "Who or what is that?" one of the rescuers asked, his tone cautious but curious. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Lyra. "Her name is Lyra," he said firmly. "She saved my life. Without her, I wouldn't have made it this far." The rescuers exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to proceed. After a brief discussion, they agreed to bring Lyra aboard the Nova Vanguard, though their expression suggested they were wary of her presence. Ethan didn't care about their hesitation. He knew Lyra posed no threat. She had proven herself time and again, not just as a survivor, but as a friend. As they prepared to leave the Starlight Horizon, Ethan took one last look around the broken ship. It had been their prison, their battleground, and ultimately, their sanctuary. Despite all the pain and hardship, it was also where he had formed a connection unlike any other. He felt a pang of sadness as he stepped onto the shuttle, leaving behind the place that had shaped him in ways he never imagined. Once aboard the Nova Vanguard, Ethan and Lyra were taken to separate areas for evaluation. Ethan underwent a series of medical tests, during which doctors marveled at his resilience. His body was weak, but his spirit remained unbroken. Meanwhile, Lyra was escorted to a containment unit designed for alien beings. Though the setup was sterile and impersonal, Ethan insisted on visiting her whenever possible. During one such visit, Ethan found Lyra sitting quietly in the corner of her chamber, her luminous skin dimmed by the harsh lighting. Her expression was calm, but he could sense her unease. He pressed his hand against the transparent barrier separating them, and after a moment, she mirrored the gesture. Their connection transcended the physical divide, speaking volumes without words. "I'll figure something out," Ethan promised, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. I won't let them send you away. Over the next few days, Ethan worked tirelessly to advocate for Lyra. He spoke with the ship's captain, Captain Hayes, explaining their journey and emphasizing Lyra's role in their survival. At first, the crew was hesitant, citing regulations and protocols regarding non-human entities. But Ethan refused to back down. He described Lyra's intelligence, her kindness, and her selflessness, painting a picture of an extraordinary being who deserved compassion rather than fear. His persistence paid off. After much deliberation, Captain Hayes agreed to allow Lyra to remain aboard the Nova Vanguard under strict supervision. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, knowing it wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Lyra adjusted to their new environment. Life aboard the Nova Vanguard was vastly different from their time on the Starlight Horizon. The ship was clean and orderly, its systems functioning smoothly. Meals were abundant and medical care helped Ethan regain his strength. Yet, despite these comforts, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their journey together was nearing its end. One evening, as they sat together in the observation deck, Lyra handed Ethan a small object wrapped in fabric. Curious, he unwrapped it carefully, revealing a crystalline shard that shimmered with iridescent colors. When he looked at Lyra questioningly, she placed a finger over her heart and then pointed to him. Her meaning was clear. It was a gift, a token of gratitude and affection. Ethan held the crystal gently, feeling its cool surface against his palm. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll never forget what we've been through." Lyra smiled faintly, her large eyes reflecting the stars outside the window. Though she couldn't speak, her expression conveyed everything she felt: gratitude, admiration, and perhaps even a hint of sadness. They both knew their paths would soon diverge, but their bond would remain unbroken. When the Nova Vanguard docked at a nearby space station, preparations were made to transport Lyra to a facility equipped to study and care for alien beings. Ethan accompanied her to the departure bay, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. As they stood facing each other, he struggled to find the right words. "I wish things could be different," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But wherever you go, know that you changed my life. You gave me hope when I thought there was none left." Lyra tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that seemed almost human. Then she reached out and touched his cheek gently, her fingers lingering for a moment before pulling away. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried immense weight of farewell filled with love and respect. As Lyra stepped onto the transport shuttle, Ethan watched her go, his chest tightening with every passing second. When the shuttle disappeared into the vastness of space, he felt a profound emptiness settle over him. But alongside the sadness was a deep sense of gratitude for the time they had shared, for the lessons they had taught each other, and for the connection that transcended species and circumstance. In the days that followed, Ethan returned to Earth, carrying the crystal Lyra had given him as a reminder of their journey. He often found himself gazing at the stars, wondering where she was and whether she thought of him too. Though their lives had taken separate paths, he knew their bond would always remain a testament to the power of trust, sacrifice, and love. In the face of adversity, Ethan's story became one of legend among those who heard it, a tale of survival, resilience, and the extraordinary connections that can form even in the darkest corners of the universe. And while he eventually rebuilt his life on Earth, a part of him forever belonged to the stars, where Lyra's light continued to shine brightly in his memory.